propaganda of the deed is specific political action meant to be exemplary to others. It is primarily associated with acts of left-wing terrorism of the late 19th and early 20th century, but also had non-violent applications. Anarchist origins. Various definitions. One of the first individuals to conceptualize propaganda by the deed was the Italian revolutionary Carlo Pisacane, who wrote in his Political Testament that ideas spring from deeds and not the other way around. Mikhail Bakunin, in his Letters to a Frenchman on the Present Crisis, stated that we must spread our principles, not with words but with deeds, for this is the most popular, the most potent, and the most irresistible form of propaganda. The concept, in a broader setting, has a rich heritage, as the words of Francis of Assisi reveal. Let them show the love by the works they do for each other, according as the Apostle says. Let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. Some anarchists, such as Johann Most, advocated publicizing violent acts of retaliation against counter-revolutionaries because we preach not only action in and for itself, but also action as propaganda. Most was an early influence on American anarchists Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman. Berkman attempted propaganda by the deed when he tried in 1892 to kill industrialist Henry Clay Frick following the deaths by shooting of several striking workers. By the 1880s, the slogan, propaganda of the deed, had begun to be used both within and outside of the anarchist movement to refer to individual bombings, regicides and tyrannicides. In 1886, French anarchist Clement Duval achieved a form of propaganda of the deed, stealing 15,000 francs from the mansion of a Parisian socialite, before accidentally setting the house on fire. Caught 2 weeks later, he was dragged from the court crying, "Long live anarchy," and condemned to death. Duval's sentence was later commuted to hard labor on Devil's Island, French Guiana. In the anarchist paper Révolte, Duval famously declared that theft exists only through the exploitation of man by man. When society refuses you the right to exist, you must take it. The policeman arrested me in the name of the law, I struck him in the name of liberty. As early as 1887, a few important figures in the anarchist movement had begun to distance themselves from individual acts of violence. Peter Kropotkin thus wrote that year in La Révolte that a structure based on centuries of history cannot be destroyed with a few kilos of dynamite. A variety of anarchists advocated the abandonment of these sorts of tactics in favor of collective revolutionary action. For example, through the trade union movement, the anarcho-syndicalist Fernand Pelloutier argued in 1895 for renewed anarchist involvement in the labor movement on the basis that anarchism could do very well without the individual dynamiter. State repression of the anarchist and labor movements following the few successful bombings and assassinations may have contributed to the abandonment of these kinds of tactics, although reciprocally state repression in the first place may have played a role in these isolated acts. The dismemberment of the French socialist movement into many groups and, following the suppression of the 1871 Paris Commune, the execution and exile of many communards to penal colonies, favored individualist political expression and acts. Anarchist historian Max Nettlau provided a more complex concept of propaganda when he said that every person is likely to be open to a different kind of argument, so propaganda cannot be diversified enough if we want to touch all. We want it to pervade and penetrate all the utterances of life, social and political, domestic and artistic, educational and recreational. There should be propaganda by word and action, the platform and the press, the street corner, the workshop, and the domestic circle, acts of revolt, and the example of our own lives as free men. Those who agree with each other may cooperate, otherwise they should prefer to work each on his own lines to trying to persuade one the other of the superiority of his own method. Later anarchist authors advocating propaganda of the deed included the German anarchist Gustav Landauer, and the Italians Enrico Malatesta and Luigi Galliani. For Gustav Landauer, propaganda of the deed meant the creation of libertarian social forms and communities that would inspire others to transform society. In Weak Statesman, Weaker People, he wrote that the state is not something that one can smash in order to destroy. The state is a relationship between human beings. One destroys it by entering into other relationships. In contrast, Enrico Malatesta described propaganda by the deed as violent communal insurrections that were meant to ignite the imminent revolution. However, Malatesta himself denounced the use of terrorism and violent physical force, stating in one of his essays, "Violence used to another's hurt, which is the most brutal form of struggle between men, can assume is eminently corrupting. It tends by its very nature to suffocate the best sentiments of man and to develop all the antisocial qualities, ferocity, hatred, revenge, the spirit of domination and tyranny, contempt of the weak, servility towards the strong, and this harmful tendency arises also when violence is used for a good end. Anarchists who rebel against every sort of oppression and struggle for the integral liberty of each and who ought thus to shrink instinctively from all acts of violence which cease to be mere resistance to oppression and become oppressive in the turn are also liable to fall into the abyss of brutal force. The excitement caused by some recent explosions and the admiration for the courage with which the bomb throwers faced death suffices to cause many anarchists to forget the program, and to enter on a path which is the most absolute negation of all anarchist ideas and sentiments. At the other extreme, the anarchist Luigi Galliani, perhaps the most vocal proponent of propaganda by the deed from the turn of the century through the end of the First World War, took undisguised pride in describing himself as a subversive, a revolutionary propagandist and advocate of the violent overthrow of established government and institutions through the use of direct action, i.e. bombings and assassinations. Galliani heartily embraced physical violence and terrorism, not only against symbols of the government and the capitalist system, such as courthouses and factories, but also through direct assassination of enemies of the people, capitalists, industrialists, politicians, judges, and policemen. He had a particular interest in the use of bombs, going so far as to include a formula for the explosive nitroglycerin in one of his pamphlets advertised through his monthly magazine, Cronaca Sovversiva. By all accounts, Galliani was an extremely effective speaker and advocate of his policy of violent action, attracting a number of devoted Italian-American anarchist followers who called themselves Gallianists. Carlo Buda, the brother of Gallianist bomb maker Mario Buda, said of him, "You heard Galliani speak, and you were ready to shoot the first policeman you saw." Illegalism, propaganda of the deed, is also related to illegalism, an anarchist philosophy that developed primarily in France, Italy, Belgium, and Switzerland during the early 20th century as an outgrowth of anarchist individualism. The illegalists openly embraced criminality as a lifestyle, influenced by theorist Max Stirner's concept of egoism. The illegalists broke from anarchists like Clement Duval and Marius Jacob, who justified theft with a theory of individual reclamation. Instead, the illegalists argued that their actions required no moral basis. Illegal acts were taken not in the name of a higher ideal, but in pursuit of one's own desires. France's Bonnot Gang was the most famous group to embrace a legalism relationship to revolution. Propaganda of the deed thus included stealing, rioting and general strikes which aimed at creating the conditions of an insurrection or even a revolution. These acts were justified as the necessary counterpart to state repression. As early as 1911, Leon Trotsky condemned individual acts of violence by anarchists as useful for little more than providing an excuse for state repression. The anarchist prophets of the propaganda by the deed can argue all they want about the elevating and stimulating influence of terrorist acts on the masses. He wrote in 1911, "Theoretical considerations and political experience prove otherwise." Vladimir Lenin largely agreed, viewing individual anarchist acts of terrorism as an ineffective substitute for coordinated action by disciplined cadres of the masses. Sociologist Max Weber wrote that the state has a monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force, or, in Karl Marx's words, the state was only the repressive apparatus of the bourgeois class. Propaganda by the deed, including assassinations, were thus legitimized by part of the anarchist movement and the First International as a valid means to be used in class struggle. The predictable state responses to these actions were supposed to display to the people the inherently repressive nature of the bourgeois state. This would in turn bolster the revolutionary spirit of the people, leading to the overthrow of the state. This is the basic formula of the cycle: protests, repression, protests, which in specific conditions may lead to an effective state of insurrection. This cycle has been observed during the 1905 Russian Revolution or in Paris in May 1968. However, it failed to achieve its revolutionary objective on the vast majority of occasions, thus leading to the abandonment by the vast majority of the anarchist movement of such bombings. However, the state never failed in its repressive response, enforcing various lower-scale raids which usually involve tough clampdowns on the whole of the labor movement. These harsh laws, sometimes accompanied by the proclamation of the state of exception, progressively led to increased criticism among the anarchist movement of assassinations, the role of several agents provocateurs and the use of deliberate strategies of tension by governments, using such false flag terrorist actions as the Spanish La Mano Negra, worked to discredit this violent tactic in the eyes of most socialist libertarians. John Phillis and Jim Bell, two of the best-known modern advocates, with the latter developing the concept of an assassination market, a market system for anonymously hiring and compensating political assassination, regicides and other assassinations. Numerous heads of state and heads of government were assassinated between 1881 and 1914 by members of the libertarian socialist movement. Regicides were for obvious reasons celebrated as popular victory over counter-revolutionary forces, which remained strong a century after the 1789 French Revolution. The first assassinations were carried out by Russian anarchists, which would lead to the creation of the term of nihilism. For example, U.S. President McKinley's assassin Leon Czolgosz claimed to have been influenced by anarchist and feminist Emma Goldman. Bombings were associated in the media with anarchists because international terrorism arose during this time period with the widespread distribution of dynamite. This image remains to this day. This perception was enhanced by events such as the 1886 Haymarket riot, where anarchists were blamed for throwing a bomb at police who came to break up a public meeting in Chicago, Illinois. Timeline of historical actions. April 4, 1866, Dmitry Karakazov made an unsuccessful attempt on the life of Tsar Alexander II at the gates of the Summer Garden in St. Petersburg. As the Tsar was leaving, Dmitry rushed forward to fire. The attempt was thwarted by Osip Komisarov, a peasant-born hatter's apprentice, who jostled Karakazov's elbow just before the shot was fired. May 11, 1878, Max Hodel attempts to assassinate Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany. His two attempts to shoot the monarch both fail, and he is apprehended and executed by beheading on August 15. August 4, 1878, Sergei Stepniak Kravchinsky stabs to death General Nikolai Mezhentsov, head of the Tsar's secret police, in response to the execution of Ivan Kovalsky. November 17, 1878, Giovanni Passanante attempts to assassinate with a dagger King Umberto I of Italy. It is the first attempted murder against the monarch and the first in the history of House of Savoy. Passanante is sentenced to death, but his penalty is commuted to prison for life. While in jail, he goes insane and is taken to the asylum. February 1879, Grigory Goldenberg shoots Prince Dmitry Kropotkin, the governor of Kharkov in the Russian Empire, to death. April 20, 1879, Alexander Soloviev attempts to assassinate Tsar Alexander II of Russia. The monarch spots the weapon in his hands and flees, but Soloviev still fires 5 shots, all of which miss. He is captured and hanged on May 28. February 17, 1880, Stepan Kalturin successfully blows up part of the Winter Palace in an attempt to assassinate Tsar Alexander. Although the Tsar escapes unharmed, 8 soldiers are killed and 45 wounded. Referring to the 1862 invention of dynamite, historian Benedict Anderson observes that Nobel's invention had now arrived politically. Kalturin is hanged on the orders of Alexander's son and successor, Alexander III, in 1882 after the assassination of a police official. March 1, 1881, Alexander II is killed in a bomb blast by Narodnaya Volia. July 23, 1892, Alexander Berkman tries to kill American industrialist Henry Clay Frick in retaliation for Frick's hiring of Pinkerton detectives to break up the Homestead strike, resulting in the deaths of 7 steelworkers. Although badly wounded, Frick survives, and Berkman is arrested and eventually sentenced to 22 years in prison. November 7, 1893, the Spanish anarchist Santiago Salvador throws 2 Orsini bombs into the orchestra pit of the Liceu Theatre in Barcelona during the second act of the opera Guillaume Tell, killing some 20 people and injuring scores of others. December 9, 1893, Auguste Vaillant throws a nail bomb in the French National Assembly, killing nobody and injuring 1. He is then sentenced to death and executed by the guillotine on February 4, 1894, shouting, "Death to bourgeois society and long live anarchy." During his trial, Vaillant declares that he had not intended to kill anybody, but only to injure several deputies in retaliation against the execution of Ravachol, who was executed for 4 bombings. February 12, 1894, Émile Henry, intending to avenge Auguste Vaillant, sets off a bomb in Café Terminus, killing 1 and injuring 20. During his trial, when asked why he wanted to harm so many innocent people, he declares, "There is no innocent bourgeois." This act is one of the rare exceptions to the rule that propaganda of the D targets only specific powerful individuals. Henry is convicted and executed by guillotine on May 21. June 24, 1894, Italian anarchist Sante Geronimo Caserio, seeking revenge for Auguste Vaillant and Émile Henry, stabs Sadi Carnot, the president of France, to death. Caserio is executed by guillotine on August 15. November 3, 1896 in the Greek city of Patras. Dimitris Matsalis, an anarchist shoemaker, attacks banker Dionysios Fragkopoulos and merchant Andreas Kollas with a knife. Fragkopoulos is killed on the spot. Kollas is seriously wounded. April 22, 1897 Pietro Acciarito tries to stab King Umberto of Italy. He is sentenced to life imprisonment. August 8, 1897 Michel Angiolillo shoots dead Spanish Prime Minister Antonio Canovas del Castillo at a thermal bath resort, seeking vengeance for the imprisonment and torture of alleged revolutionaries at the Montjuic fortress. Angiolillo is executed by garrote on August 20. September 10, 1898 Luigi Lucchesi stabs to death Empress Elizabeth, the consort of Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria-Hungary, with a needle file in Geneva, Switzerland. Lucchesi is sentenced to life in prison and eventually commits suicide in his cell. July 29, 1900 Gaetano Bresci shoots dead King Umberto, in revenge for the Bava Beccaris massacre in Milan. Due to the abolition of capital punishment in Italy, Bresci is sentenced to penal servitude for life on Santo Stefano Island, where he is found dead less than a year later. September 6, 1901 Leon Czolgosz shoots U.S. President William McKinley at point-blank range at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. McKinley dies on September 14, and Czolgosz is executed by electric chair on October 29. Czolgosz's anarchist views have been debated. April 23, 1902 Luigi Galliani speaks to striking silk workers at a factory in Paterson, New Jersey, urging all American workers to declare a general strike and overthrow U.S. capitalist society. Galliani, who was wounded in the face when police opened fire on the striking workers, is later indicted for inciting a riot. He flees to Canada, where he is apprehended and returned to the U.S. by Canadian authorities. November 15, 1902 Gennaro Rubino attempts to murder King Leopold II of Belgium as he returns in a procession from a memorial service for his recently deceased wife, Marie Henriette. All three of Rubino's shots miss the monarch's carriage, and he is quickly subdued by the crowd and taken into police custody. He is sentenced to life imprisonment and dies in prison in 1918. May 31, 1906 Catalan anarchist Matthew Morral tries to kill King Alfonso XIII of Spain and Princess Victoria Eugenia of Battenberg after the wedding by throwing a bomb into the wedding procession following the ceremony. The monarchs are unhurt, but some bystanders and horses are killed. Morral is apprehended 2 days later and commits suicide while being transferred to prison. February 1, 1908 Manuel Buica and Alfredo Costa shoot to death King Carlos I of Portugal and his son, Crown Prince Luís Felipe, respectively, in the Lisbon regicide. Both Buica and Costa, who are sympathetic to a republican movement in Portugal that includes anarchist elements, are shot dead by police officers. March 28, 1908 Anarchist Selig Cohen aka Selig Silverstein tries to throw a bomb in New York City's Union Square. A premature explosion kills a bystander named Ignaz Hildebrand and mortally wounds Cohen, who dies a month later. Several contemporary pictures taken after the explosion show the mortally wounded Silverstein with his victim next to him. November 14, 1909 Argentine anarchist militant Simon Radovitzky assassinates Buenos Aires chief of police, Lieutenant Ramon Falcon, by throwing a bomb at his carriage while Falcon was returning from a deceased fellow officer's funeral. The assassination prompted President Figueroa Figueroa Alcorta to declare a state of siege and pass the Social Defense Law, which allowed the deportation of anarchist agitators. September 14, 1911, Dmitry Bogrov shoots Russian Prime Minister Pyotr Stolypin at the Kiev Opera House in the presence of Tsar Nicholas II and two of his daughters, Grand Duchesses Olga and Tatiana. Stolypin dies 4 days later, and Bogrov is hanged on September 28. November 12, 1912, anarchist Manuel Pardinas shoots Spanish Prime Minister José Canalejas dead in front of a Madrid bookstore. Pardinas then immediately turns the gun on himself and commits suicide. March 18, 1913, Alexandros Chinas shoots dead King George I of Greece while the monarch is on a walk near the White Tower of Thessaloniki. Chinas is captured and tortured. He commits suicide on May 6 by jumping out the window of the gendarmerie, although there is speculation that he could have been thrown to his death. July 4, 1914, a bomb being prepared for use at John D. Rockefeller's home at Tarrytown, New York, explodes prematurely, killing 3 anarchists, Arthur Caron, Carl Hansen and Charles Berg, and an innocent woman, Mary Chavez. October 13 and November 14, 1914, Galleanists, radical followers of Luigi Galleani, explode 2 bombs in New York City after police forcibly disperse a protest by anarchists and communists at John D. Rockefeller's home in Tarrytown. In 1914, Marie Gans threatens to shoot John D. Rockefeller as she arrives with a crowd and a loaded pistol in front of the Standard Oil building in Manhattan. He is not in. July 22, 1916, San Francisco Preparedness Day bombing. 10 persons killed, 40 injured. November 24, 1917, 9 policemen and a bystander in Milwaukee, Wisconsin killed when a time bomb left at a Catholic church by Galleanists was taken to a police station, where it exploded. April to June 1919, First Red Scare. April 28, Mayor Ole Hansen of Seattle, Washington, receives a Galleanist mail bomb. April 29, a Galleanist mail bomb intended for U.S. Senator Thomas W. Hardwick explodes, burning a servant and blowing off her hands. June 2, Galleanist Carlo Valdinoca killed when his bomb explodes prematurely. June 3, New York City night watchman William Boehner killed by a Galleanist bomb placed at a judge's house. September 16, 1920. The Wall Street bombing kills 38 and wounds 400 in the Manhattan Financial District. Galleanists are believed responsible, particularly Mario Buda, the group's principal bomb maker, although the crime remains officially unsolved. March 8, 1921. 3 anarchists on a motorcycle shoot dead Spanish Prime Minister Eduardo Dato Heredia in Puerta de Alcalá, Madrid. 1922. Gustave Bouvet attempts to kill French President Alexandre Millerand. May 25, 1926. Shalom Schwarzbard assassinates Simon Petlura, head of the government-in-exile Ukrainian People's Republic, in Paris. After an 8-day trial, he is acquitted by the jury, who has been convinced of Schwarzbard's just cause. The core of his defense was that he was avenging the deaths of victims of pogroms by Petlura's forces. October 31, 1926. Anteo Zamboni was a 15-year-old anarchist who tried to assassinate Benito Mussolini in Bologna by shooting at him during the parade celebrating the March on Rome. Zamboni, whose shot missed Mussolini, was immediately attacked and lynched by nearby squadristi. 1926 to 1928. Several bombings in Argentina organized by the Italian anarchist Severino di Giovanni. In the frame of the international campaign supporting Sacco and Vanzetti and against fascist Italy's interests in Argentina, bombings of the U.S. Embassy, of the Buenos Aires offices of Citibank of New York and Bank of Boston, and of the Italian consulate on May 23, 1928, September 27, 1932. A dynamite-filled package bomb left by Galleonists destroys Judge Webster Thayer's home in Worcester, Massachusetts, injuring his wife and a housekeeper. Judge Thayer had presided over the trials of Galleonists Sacco and Vanzetti.